Good afternoon. Me myself, Shantanu Chakraborty from Department of Data Science. Today we are going to learn about the looping, branching, and break statement that we use in Python programming language. Also, we will be doing some hands-on based on that. So basically, Python is highly structured and modular programming language, and it provides a lot of statement for looping and branching and for the decision making and for control, right? The control statement that we use in Python determines the flow of instruction or the step-by-step instruction which will be executed in sequence. So it decides the sequence in which the program instruction will be executed. So the sequencing and how's the flow of control is going to take place within the program. So there are various types of control statement that we use within Python programming language. A Python program is executed sequentially. It starts from the first line to the last line. But there are certain selections and control that will transfer the control from one instruction to another within the program state of construct. The other one is the iterative control. The iterative controls are the one which will give us the looping or the iterations within the Python code that we are writing. Now, when it comes to the control statement, the first and the most essential control statement that we use in Python is if-else condition. Here, first we check for a test expression and then we evaluate the expression. So based on the condition, the true block will be executed. Otherwise, the control will go to the false block. As you all can see over here, here we have initialized a variable x equal to 10. If the value of x is greater than 0, then the condition, the value of x will be incremented by 1 and it will print the value of x. If the value of x is not greater than 0, then it will not going to increment the value of x and it will not display the incremented value. So this is a simple example of if-else statement that we use in Python. But we should be very careful about the indentation. The indentation should be properly matched while we are executing or we are providing if-else statement within the Python block. There is another statement, if-else condition. So here, first we check for a test expression. If the expression returns a true value, the control will go to the true block, else the control will go to the false block. For instance, if you input an age, and if age is greater than 18, then it's going to print you are eligible to vote. Otherwise, it will print you're not eligible to vote. So this is also one of the conditional statement that we use within Python programming language. So this is a syntax of if-else statement that is being used or that is being evaluated when we are checking for a test expression and we are evaluating the test expression based on which the true block or the false block will be executed accordingly. So then we have a nested if-else statement. So nested if-else statement is a compound statement that we use in Python programming language so that we can perform more complex checks on various statements that we are using. So suppose if we input a number and want to check whether the number lies within a specified range. So if it lies within 0 to 10, then we can print the number is in the range 0 to 10. Else we can check if the number is between 10 to 20, then we print the number is in the range 10 to 20. If we check if the number is between 20 to 30, then it will display the number is in the range of 20 to 30. So whatever is the number that you enter as an input, it will check that number and it will find out whether the number which is being entered lies within the specified range or not. So this is a nested if-else statement or else-if ladder statement that you have done in C programming. This is the syntax that we use in Python programming language. It's also called as else-if statement. Else-if statements means repeatedly the text expression is evaluated. So the condition which is true, the control will go to the true block and it will display the true block. Otherwise, it's going to go and check the next condition or the text expression. If that condition is true, then it will go to the next true block, else it returns to the false block and it exits from the block, from all the blocks. This is else-if statement that we use. And then we have the looping constructs. So as we have for loop and while loop in C and Java and other programming language that you have learned earlier, we have while loop in Python. So while basically is an entry control loop. It's going to check for a condition. If the condition is true, then it will the instruction within the body of the loop will be executed. And once the condition is false, we are going to move out of the body of the loop and the iteration will stop. There is a very important loop that is used in Python is a for loop. So for loop provides a mechanism to repeat a task until a particular condition holds true. So it is known as a determinate or definite loop because the programmer exactly know how many times the loop will repeat. So basically it specifies the range. The range is the number that is assigned to a loop control variable. So whatever is the range, the loop counter variable will iterate that many number of time. And then we have the statement block. The statement block will be executed. And once the iteration is over, we'll move outside the for loop. Now for loop, this is the standard syntax. So for loop starts, for example, for I in range 1, 5. So the iteration will start with 1 and it will go till 5. And then it will increment the value of I, that is the loop counter variable, by 1, and it will display the numbers from 1 to 5. 1 to 4 because it displays the number from 1 to n minus 1. So if n is 5, then it will iterate from 1 to 4. Similarly, if you write for loop I in range 1, 10, 2, the iteration will start from 1 to 10. But since you have given step 2, so it will increment the loop counter variable in each iteration by value 2. So it will print 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Then the range function in the for loop plays a very important role. So range function is given a single argument. So it produces an object within that particular range. But if it is given a 2 argument, then it produces a value from the first to the second and so on. But if it is given a 3 argument, it will iterate from the starting value to the end value and it increments the value 2 plus 3 and so on. So the range has 3 arguments and the third argument specifies the interval of the sequence that is produced. So in this case, the third argument must be an integer, the one that we see in this example. So condition control and counter control. So basically, there are two scenarios that we encounter while using the iterations in looping. One is counter control loop. So counter control loop is used when the number of times the loop have to be executed and is known in advance. So that in that scenario, we use the counter control loop. Then the second scenario is the conditional control loop. The conditional control loop is used when the number of times the loop has to be executed is not known in advance. That is called as conditional control loop. Then we have counter control loop. We have a counter variable. So in counter control loop, we have a counter variable. Whereas in a conditional control loop, we use a sentinel variable. So we use the value and the limitation of a variable that we use within a counter control loop. But under the conditional control loop, the value of the counter variable and the condition for the loop execution both are restricted. So here in one scenario where we are using a loop, while loop. We see the counter control loop when the number of times a loop has to be executed is known in advance. The second one is the conditional control loop where the number of times the loop has to be executed is not known in advance. So that is the main difference between the counter control loop and the conditional control loop that we use in Python coding. Next comes is a nested loop. Nested loops are widely used in Python programming. So Python allows its users to have nested loop. That is the loop which can be placed inside another loop. So if we place a loop within another loop, that is called as our nested loop. So this is a feature in the Python programming language which can be used to control the number of times a particular set of statements will be executed. So we have an outer loop and we have an inner loop. So outer loop controls how the inner loop will be executed. So the outer loop will control the iteration to be executed in the inner loop. For example, here you see I is the outer loop and the j is the inner loop. So the outer loop controls the execution of the inner loop j. So that when the value of I is 1 to 4 in the range, then the j will iterate from 1 to 4. When value of I becomes 2, then j will iterate from 1 to 2, 1 to 4. When a value of I is 3, the j will again iterate from 1 to 4. When the value of 4 is I is 4, j will again iterate from 1 to 4. So the outer loop controls the execution of inner loop, and that is why this scenario in Python coding is called as nested for loop. We also have a break statement in Python as we studied in other programming language like C and Java and R programming. So what is the job of a break statement? The break statement is used to terminate the execution of the nearest enclosing loop in which it appears. So the break statement is widely used both for while and for loop. So we can use a break statement to come outside a for loop or a while loop. So whenever it encounters a break statement, so it will put the loop control, transfer the control out of the loop. So it transfers the control out of the while loop or outside the for loop. So this is how the break statement helps in transferring the control outside the loop. Then we have a continue statement. A continue statement is unlike a break statement. It will not take the control outside the loop. When the compiler encounters a continue statement, then the rest of the statement in the loop are skipped, and the control is unconditionally transferred to the next iteration. So that is what a continue statement will do. It will skip that part of the iteration in the loop and it will transfer the control to the next iteration to be taking place within the loop. There is a pass statement which is used. So when a statement is required syntactically, but no command or code has to be executed. So that is where we use a pass statement. The pass is basically a no operation statement, or you can call it as a null operation statement. Nothing happens when a pass statement is executed. So nothing will happen when a pass statement is executed. So the pass statement is used and is required syntactically to command a code that has to be executed. And while the interpreter ignores a comment entirely, pass is not ignored. So comment is not executed, but the pass statement is executed, and then something happens to the statement. So else statement used with loop. So we can use the else statement with a loop. Unlike we cannot use else statement with loop in C, C++. But Python gives us the flexibility to use a else statement within a loop. So when the loop has completed iteration, we can use the else statement within the loop when the condition becomes false. So basically, we can execute it when the condition has become false, then we can use the else statement within the loop. So let us do some hands-on on these statements that we have studied and right now in our Python compiler, and we'll see how these statement can. Let us start coding and execute some code in Python using for, if, and if else statement with break statement. Let us do some hands-on. So let us start with if statement. Suppose if you enter a number or age of a person, and if that age is greater than 18, then person is eligible to vote. So suppose you have taken age and you write input, enter, and you write input, enter age of, enter the age. Now this input is of what type? This input is of integer type. So you need to specify this is an integer input, right? Now once you have taken the age, then you can check if age is greater than 18. If age is greater than 18, if this condition is true, then we can go to the true block and we can display the person is eligible to vote, or you can write print you are eligible to vote. Else you write you are not eligible to vote. So we can write print eligible to vote. Suppose if this condition fails, then we can come to the else part and we can display not eligible to vote. So be very careful about the indent, because else should come just below if, and then you print not eligible to vote. So what we are doing is that we are using a if-else statement and to check whether a person is eligible to vote or not. So now we are executing it in online Python compiler. That's the Google Colab window. And here once the program starts executing, asks for age. If you give the age more than 18, the program will display eligible to vote. Otherwise, it will display not eligible to vote. Let us go to the next code and explore that code also. So here, if we input a number and we want to check whether the number is positive or whether the number is negative or the number is zero, so how we can execute those commands? So here you write n int input. Then you enter any number of your choice. Now, if that number n is less than 0, so it will display the number is negative. The number is negative. For instance, if that number, if we go to the else part and if we see the number is elif, we use the elif statement, and in elif, if we see the number is greater than 0, then we'll print the number is positive. And then we display the number is positive. Suppose if the number is not positive and the number is not negative, then we go to the else part and it will print the number is 0. Else means the last part, and print the number is neither positive, neither negative. So number is 0. So let us execute this code and check the output. So we need to provide colon after every elif. Otherwise, you'll get, suppose we enter a number 12. So it display a number is positive. Suppose you give a number minus 12. It'll display the number is negative. For instance, you give a number 0, it'll display the number is 0. So if else, elif statement and if else statement is it clear in Python. Now we'll move into the next iteration. Basically, we'll move into uh, for loop and while loop, and we'll check how the for loop and while loop will execute and what output that they will return to the calling portion of the program. So let us write a program using a for while loop that prints the number between the range 1 to 20. So let us go ahead and complete an iteration with a while loop, and then we'll do the same iteration with the for loop also and check the output, right? So suppose we want to display a number between 1 to 10. So take I as 1. Now you write while I is less than or equal to 10. And then you provide a colon like this, right? So once you provide the colon, then you give within the print statement, then you write print I. So you want to print the value of I. So what we are going to do is that we are going to print the value of I, and print I you can write, and with the print I you can also give an extension equal to end, and then give a space like this, right? And then after that, you increment the value of I is equal to I plus 1. So what it will do, it will increment the loop counter variable I by 1. So once you execute this loop, it will show you the number in the range between 1 to 10. Similarly, we can write a loop that is called as a for loop, and we can also show some sort of iteration in a for loop. So the syntax of for loop is a little bit different from the syntax of while loop that we have done. And how it differs, let us check. So suppose if you have to use a for loop to display the number between the range 1 to 10, so you have to write for, you take an I equal to 1, and then you write for I in range. So suppose you have to take the range 1 to suppose 11, then it will iterate that many number of times. So for I, you have to specify in range. So for I in range, that you need to specify, and then the range you have to provide it in first bracket, and you have to terminate the for with the colon, right? And then inside the for you can print the value of I followed by end. So it will come in one single line with the spaces. Now you run the code, it will do the same thing that you see in the above code. If you give the space here a little bit more, then it will print the numbers with little bit space in between. So that is the same while loop is iterating. It's printing the value between 1 to 10, and the for loop also does the same thing as it is done in case of a while loop. Now, if we provide a break statement, so what the break statement will do, it will take the control outside the loop. So let us do an example when we use a break statement inside the while loop or inside the for loop, right? So let us write a break statement. So while I is less than equal to 10, it will print. But if suppose the value of I is greater than 5, then what will happen? It'll encounter a break. If it'll encounter a break and then it will otherwise increment it by 1. So it will be encounter break 5, then it will be writing a break. Else it will increment it by 1. The value will be incremented by 1. The loop counter variable otherwise will be incremented by 1. So this is what the break statement will do. It will break and will take the control outside the while loop. So previously the while loop was printing the numbers between the range 1 to 10. But once it is above 5, it will break and it take the control outside the loop. So if condition has to be executed and it has to be completed with a specific colon, right? So you have given a colon over here, and once you have encountered the condition, it's going to break and it's going to take the control outside the loop. So this is how your break statement will work and will take the control outside the loop. So what happens is that we have seen the uh, break statement, we have seen for loop, we have seen while loop, we have seen how the if else and elif statement can work within the Python programming language and how it can execute and it can provide us with various output from time to time. Let us examine few more examples in Python that we can work on with, and we'll be working on some more programs. For example, can we write a program in Python to calculate a factorial or sum of a series or a nested loop construct? So let us do some coding on nested loops and see how the nested loop constructs can work. So nested loop, as we know, it's a combination of outer loop and an inner loop. So we got a outer loop, we got an inner loop, and both the loops when work together, we get a concept of nested loop. So let us execute a code which will show us how a nested loop construct will work in case of Python programming language. So let us do some hands-on. So as we know, the nested loops are basically the two loops we have. One is the outer one and one is the inner one. So suppose for I, you take an I equal to 1 and then you write the outer loop for I in range. So you specify the range. Suppose I is 1 comma 5 colon. So when I is in a range 1 to 5, so what happens is that will print. It will print like this. And then suppose it exceeds that range. So we'll write for J in range, for J in range. So you also specify the range for J, and the range for J can be your 1 comma 5. So you'll have that many number of iteration. Now what you wish to print or what you wish to display within that iteration, you can make it very clear. Suppose you want to print star or asterisk like this. So you print asterisk and you write comma and equal to, give a space between them so that you'll know what this nested loop iterations are doing. So once you run the code in your online compiler in Python, what you can see how these iterations are working and what type of output that they are providing. So once you run an iteration with a for loop or with a nested for loop, it gives you the output that it will be the value of I when it is 1. J will be iterating that many number of times and you will be getting the output in your output stream accordingly, right? So basically, this is how your for or your nested for loop is working. In for loop, you either have one for loop, but in nested for loop, you have more than one for loop. So the outer for loop controls the execution of the inner for loop, and whereby you get the output. So this is how your looping and branching statements are working in Python programming, and both the looping and branching statement playing a very, very important and crucial role. So we can print a multiplication table in Python, and we'll see how we can. So with that, we come down to the end of today's session, where we learn if else elif, nested if else, for loop, while loop, and nested loop with example of continue and break statement, how they are executed within the for and while loop. So with that, we sign off for today. Bye bye. Have a wonderful day.